Hi everyone, and welcome to Inside Archaeology. If you're new here, my name is Rachel. I'm an archaeologist, and a while ago, we're just going to gloss over exactly how long ago, I spent 3 summers digging in the Kingdom of Jordan, during which time I visited the famous site of Petra 4 times, not to humble brag too much. As one of the new 7 wonders of the world and cinematic location of the Holy Grail, Petra is a place that sparks the interest of many people. But I have a question for you. Do you know who built it? Have you ever heard of the Nabataeans? They are something of an archaeological enigma. They built Petra and were a thriving, widely literate culture, yet left behind very little of their own historical records and are generally overlooked as a bit of a footnote in favor of their more well known contemporaries, the Seleucids, the Ptolemies, the Romans, etc. History tells us that the Nabataeans were nomads, dwelling in tents in the desert, but also that they built spectacular and awe-inspiring monuments that have endured through to today. This begs the question of who were these people that somewhat suddenly appeared in history? Where did they come from? Why did they build such amazing monuments and then seem to disappear? This is the first video in my wider series, The Builders of Petra, where we dig deep to try and answer some of these questions to give you a better understanding of one of the most gifted peoples of the ancient world. If you like history, hopefully you'll enjoy the unique story of the Nabataeans. This video was originally going to cover basically everything I could find about them, but as I was writing it, I realized how long it would be, so I've broken it up into 3 parts. Today, we'll be covering the history of the Nabataeans and the Nabataean kingdom. Next time, we'll be covering where they lived, what gods they worshipped, their other cultural practices. And lastly, we'll be going on an archaeological tour of Petra, where I take you through the site, all the different monuments, and also give you some tips and tricks for planning your own visit if you ever want to go. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next videos, as well as to learn more about real-life archaeology and its discoveries. Also, if you find that you like this video, please don't forget to take a moment to like or share it. And if you want to take it further and actively support me and everything that I'm doing here, all super thanks or Ko-fi donations and sales of Redbubble merch, which is all designed by me. You can find a link to it in the description. Go back into improving and promoting the channel. Okay, everyone, let's dig in. It's widely agreed that the Nabataeans were an ancient nomadic tribe that roamed the Arabian desert, moving with their herds to wherever they could find pasture and water. They are difficult to track in historical records. Several documents seem to mention them, but no one is sure that the Nabataeans who built Petra are the one and the same as the people that are mentioned in these documents. Assyrian records tell of King Ashurbanipal fighting with the Nabataeans of Arabia in the 7th century BCE. Most historians start talking about them in 586 BCE, when the Babylonians captured Jerusalem and the Jewish people were hauled off as captives to distant lands. This provided an opportunity for their rival neighbors, the Edomites, who began moving from the barren hills of the south into the rich abandoned lands of Judah to the north. Around this time, we begin to find records of Nabataeans living in Edomite territory. However, it's unclear if they immigrated into the area when the Edomites left, or if they had already been there for hundreds of years, living quietly alongside the Edomites. Most historians believe that the Nabataeans must have migrated into the territory when the Edomites went north. This then leads to the question of where did they come from? One hypothesis places their original homeland in Yemen, but their deities, language, and script share nothing with those of southern Arabia. The suggestion that they came from the Hejaz area on the west coast of Saudi Arabia is considered to be more convincing, as they share a lot of gods in common with the people there, and NBW, or Nabu, the root consonant of the tribe's name, is found in the early Semitic languages of Hejaz. Regardless of where they came from, they eventually ended up in northwestern Arabia and much of what is now modern-day Jordan and parts of Israel. The rise of the Nabataeans as a political power happened in 2 phases. During the first, in the 4th century BCE, they were ruled by an elders' council and had established themselves in the area around Petra, but still maintained a largely nomadic existence. Around this time, they got involved in the lucrative trade of frankincense and myrrh. At first, they were little more than middlemen paid to transport luxury goods. However, as their economic and political fortunes improved, they gained political control over all the lands bordering the Arabian frontier, a vast territory stretching from Damascus in the north to Hegra in the south. This allowed them to become one of the most successful commercial societies in the Middle East. They used their knowledge of sea routes and caravan routes to form a solid link between Eastern goods and Western markets. Their first mention in the historic record that we definitely can pinpoint and assign to them dates to 312/11 BCE, when they were attacked without success during the wars of Alexander the Great's successors. This mention happens in a document made by a Seleucid officer who was writing a battle report. However, this report itself has not survived. We only know of it because 260 years later, the Greek historian Diodorus cited this report in his own work, making it the first actual historical reference of them. It's very much seems like a game of telephone. According to Diodorus, Antigonus I conquered the Levant and sought to add the land of the Arabs who are called Nabataeans to his existing territories. By this time, the Nabataeans were distinguished from the other Arab tribes by their wealth generated from their trade caravans that transported luxury goods from Yemen across the Arabian Peninsula, passing through Petra and ending up at the port of Gaza for shipment into Europe. Antigonus ordered one of his officers, Athenaeus, to raid the Nabataeans and loot their herds and possessions. Athenaeus learned that every year the Nabataeans gathered for a festival during which women, children, and elders were left at a certain rock, which may or may not be Petra, and he used this knowledge to take the inhabitants by surprise. After the raid, the Greeks departed before nightfall and made camp where they thought they would be safe from retaliation. Instead, the camp was attacked by Nabataean soldiers, and almost the entire force, including Athenaeus, was slain. After the Nabataeans returned to their rock, they wrote a letter to Antigonus declaring that they had destroyed the Antigonid army in self-defense. Antigonus replied by blaming Athenaeus for acting independently, trying to lull the Nabataeans into a false sense of security. This didn't work. They remained suspicious and established outposts on the edge of the mountains in preparation for future attacks. Their suspicions were proved correct as a second attack came from an army of infantry and cavalry led by Antigonus's son Demetrius, known as the Besieger. The Nabataean scouts spotted the marching enemy and used smoke signals to warn of the army. They dispersed their herds and possessions to guarded locations in harsh terrain, such as deserts and mountaintops, which would be difficult to attack, and garrisoned the rock to defend what remained. The Antagonids attacked the rock through its single artificial approach. Could this maybe be the Sikh? But were repelled. A Nabataean called out to Demetrius, pointing out that Antigonid aggression made no sense, for the land was semi-barren and the Nabataeans had no desire to be slaves. Taking stock of his limited supplies and the determination of his opponents, Demetrius was eventually forced to accept peace and withdrew with hostages and gifts. He drew his father's displeasure for the peace, but this was alleviated by reports of bitumen deposits in the Dead Sea, a valuable commodity that was essential for the embalming process. Antigonus sent a third expedition after this resource, but was met by a force of 600 Arabs sailing on reed rafts that attacked with arrows. These are almost certainly the Nabataeans as well. The event is described as the first conflict caused by a Middle Eastern petroleum product, and finally managed to deter Antigonus from further attempts to expand southward. The second phase of the Nabataeans' rise saw the creation of a political state in the mid-3rd century BCE with the adoption of a kingship system. The earliest evidence for this comes from a 3rd century BCE inscription, which mentions a king whose name has been lost. Anonymous coins dated to the second half of the 3rd century BCE, found mainly within Nabataean territory, support such an early date of their kingdom. Once established, this kingdom then spent more than 4 centuries dominating, politically and commercially, a large territory and was arguably the first Arab kingdom in the area. External accounts and local archaeological evidence demonstrate that they played a relatively substantial political and economic role in the Hellenistic world. For example, Petra was included in a list of major cities in the Mediterranean area to be visited alongside Alexandria, which was considered to be a supreme city in the civilized world. The first explicitly named king of the Nabataeans is Aretas I. His first appearance in history is in the second book of Maccabees. It appears that the Nabataeans at this time were allies of the Maccabees during their struggles against the Seleucids, descendants of another of Alexander's generals. The Nabataeans then became the rivals of the Judean Hasmonean dynasty. Around 99 BCE, the Hasmonean king Janaeus launched a campaign that captured several territories north of Nabatea along the road to Damascus. These territorial acquisitions threatened Nabataean trade interests, and in response, the Nabataean king Obotus I fought to restore the areas and managed to defeat Janaeus at the Battle of Gadara around 93 BCE, when he ambushed him and his forces in a steep valley where Janaeus was lucky to escape alive. This victory alerted the Seleucids to the increasing influence of the Nabataeans to the south. They were not impressed and decided to take action. However, when fighting against them during the Battle of Cana in 84 BCE, the Seleucid king was slain during combat. His demoralized army fled and perished in the desert from starvation. After Obotus's victories over the Judeans and the Greeks, he became the first Nabataean king to be worshipped as a god by his people. During the reign of Aretas III, Obotus's brother, the kingdom seems to have reached its territorial peak. However, further expansion was halted by defeat at the hands of a Roman army who besieged Petra and, similar to Demetrius, were persuaded to leave via a bribe and the fact that they had run out of supplies. In exchange, King Aretas retained all his possessions, including Damascus. And at this point, Nabatea became a Roman client kingdom, which preserved its formal independence. As an ally of the Roman Empire, the kingdom flourished as its power extended far into Arabia along the Red Sea to Yemen, and Petra was thriving as a cosmopolitan marketplace. Under the Pax Romana, the Roman peace, the Nabataeans lost their warlike and nomadic habits and became a sober, acquisitive, orderly people wholly intent on trade and agriculture. But this was not to last. The assassination of Julius Caesar in 44 BCE ushered in a period of relative anarchy, and the nearby Parthian kings took advantage of the chaotic situation to attack the Romans in the region. The Nabataeans mistakenly sided with the Parthians, and after their defeat, Petra had to pay tribute to Rome. When they fell behind in paying this tribute, they were invaded twice by their Roman vassal, King Herod the Great. The second attack saw him take control of a large portion of their territory, including the lucrative northern trading routes into Syria. Despite this, the Nabataeans continued to prosper for a while. King Aretas IV, who ruled from 9 BCE to 40 CE, built a chain of settlements along the caravan routes to develop the incense trade. He is the king who is usually associated with the building of Petra's most famous monument, the treasury, as his mausoleum. His daughter was married to Herod Antipas, who famously then divorced her to marry his stepbrother's wife, Herodias. The opposition to this marriage led to the beheading of John the Baptist. After he received news of the divorce, Aretas invaded the territory of Herod Antipas and defeated his army. Herod was only able to escape death due to the assistance of the Romans. However, it was only a matter of time before the Nabataeans fell under direct Roman rule. Their last king, Rabble II, struck a deal with the Romans that as long as they did not attack during his lifetime, they could have his kingdom after he died. After his death in 106 CE, the Roman Emperor Trajan invaded and faced practically no resistance, officially annexing Nabatea into the Roman Empire. At this point in time, their vast trade empire seems to have largely continued. However, their cultural and civilization decline had already started. During the 3rd century CE, the local issue of coinage came to an end, and there was no more building of sumptuous tombs. They stopped writing in Aramaic and began writing in Greek instead. By the 5th century, they converted to Christianity. Eventually, the preference of sea-based routes over land ones caused a gradual commercial decline and the end of Nabatea's time as a trade hub. Earthquakes and economic shifts meant their towns and cities were slowly abandoned and largely forgotten about outside of the local populace. At some point, the local Bedouin tribes, known as the Badul, moved into the various caves and tombs of Petra and repurposed them for their homes. In 1812, Swiss traveler Johann Ludwig Burckhardt rediscovered Petra, but due to its difficult access, remote location, and hostile locals, it didn't really become a major tourist attraction until the 1900s. Once Petra was rediscovered and archaeologists started wondering who these industrious, illustrious people were, a number of modern Arab tribes immediately offered themselves as possible candidates for their descendants. However, establishing concrete evidence of this has so far not happened, as far as I could find. It's important to note that it is unlikely that any single modern ethnic group can claim direct descendants from the Nabataeans. The ensuing 2,000 years between the integration of the kingdom into the Roman Empire and now have provided ample opportunity for dilution of bloodlines and DNA and mixing of various ethnic groups. However, this doesn't mean it's not something that's worth looking into and perhaps could be a future research project. While the occupants of Petra's most visible tombs were removed long ago, we do occasionally find Nabataean skeletal remains, and it might be the case eventually that some of them are well preserved enough to extract and examine their DNA. I'm hopeful that advancements in ancient DNA analysis could mean that in the next few decades, someone will conduct a study to look at and compare samples between modern populations with confirmed Nabataean burials to look for any connections. This same technology might even help us answer the question of where they originally came from as well. All right, everyone, time to holster our trowels for today. That's everything for this video. Did you like it? Did you learn something new? Is there anything important that I missed? Don't forget to comment, like the video, or subscribe to the channel before you leave. If you're feeling extra generous, you can give me a super thanks, a Ko-fi donation, or visit my Redbubble shop. Taking a few seconds to support me in any way you can helps grow the channel and promotes quality heritage content that is well-sourced, researched, and presented by someone who is an expert in this subject. It shows the algorithm that people are interested in real archaeology. Thank you so much for watching. Stay curious, and I hope to see you on my next adventure into the world of archaeology.